Hi everyone, my name is Charles Joe, and I am with the ledgerback Digital Commons Research Cooperative. So I will be recording some videos just going over the slides for the Introduction to Data Cooperatives course, which you can find on the Ledgerback Academy website at learn.ledgerback.xyz. And so, there on the site you can find the course, and you can find the syllabus, the readings, quiz, pretty much everything associated with the course there. Logistics-wise, there's also a channel on the forum, a thread on the forum, the Ledgerback forum, where you can discuss the course. So if you have any questions about the course, you can post them there. Additionally, you can send an email to ledgerback@gmail.com, or you can send a direct message on Twitter at ledgerback, and I'll try to get back to you, and hopefully be able to respond to your inquiry. But for this specific video, we're just going to be going over the slides for Lecture 1, Data Privacy and Ethics Issues. It's pretty much just going to cover the readings. So if you did the readings, this will be very helpful, hopefully, to just dig a little bit deeper into the readings. If you didn't do the readings, I recommend doing them beforehand, because I'm going to be kind of giving a quick overview and diving into some really specific things that I want to go over, but wouldn't be the whole reading. So I recommend doing the readings before looking at the slides, because it'll just make more sense. And so here's the outline. As you can see, we're going over five topics. So these are the readings, the required readings. There are some optional readings. So if you're interested in in some additional material covering data privacy and ethics issues, I recommend looking at that, and that's also in the readings table. And the readings table is just a link to an Airtable base, and so from there you should be able to find all the readings. Okay, so we'll just go over the first reading. It's a multi-billion dollar market for your phone's location data. This is an article from The Markup, really cool publication. So the first point, there's lack of transparency around the location data industry. As the article really showed, we know that there are data brokers, data collectors for location data, primarily trying to get location data from people's smartphones or mobile phones. But there's quite a lack of transparency around what's actually going on. Once this data gets collected, where does it go? What happens to it? Who's keeping it? What are they doing with it? So that's what this article is about. And moving on to location data pipelines. Kind of just like a brief overview of what's going on. As I was mentioning a little bit earlier, it's like, you have people having smartphones and mobile phones. You download an app, and you might not know what exactly the information that's being collected by the app. So some of them do collect location data, and likewise, do they do the location data? Does the app need the location data to actually function? And as I said here, so for functional purposes, for economic purposes, or both. It could also be that the app itself is not necessarily collecting location data for economic purposes. Could be just purely functional, but it could be a third-party service. So as I mentioned, it could be the software development kit that the app uses, or some other third-party service that the app uses, which is collecting location data for its own uses, which could be functional or could be economic. So it's not necessarily just the app itself, but the app could just be purely functional, not trying to monetize a user's location data, but it could be a third-party service which is trying to monetize the user's location data, which can lead to problems, of course. And as I mentioned, apps really do disclose why they're using your location data. It generally makes a lot of sense for certain apps to use your location data, like for example, like Maps or a mapping app, because if they have a location, then they can provide you with better services to help you locate things, which of course kind of makes sense about why they would. But of course, it could go beyond just purely functional. And then you have some apps, I think it might have been, an example might be like the weather app, which doesn't use your location to determine what weather is relevant to you, the weather conditions, but also it might be, using it also to monetize and sell. So moving on to the location data marketplace, this is a really interesting part of the article talking about location data marketplace, but it's really just kind of where the meats and bones are. And so, of course, marketplace themselves don't actually directly monetize location data. They're just a place for suppliers and buyers to meet. So it's not necessarily that the marketplace itself is the one monetizing your data. It's usually the people on the platform, the suppliers or the buyers, who are the ones transacting and sharing the data. Really important thing to note is that data can be resold multiple times to various buyers. So depending on who the buyer is, they might want a specific location data set, and it could be used for really various things. Might be the government wants to buy it to use to track certain people. It could be a retail business which wants to track how people are moving in certain and all around their retail area. So it could be like a store, big brand company wants to know how people move around, where their stores are located. It could also be researchers who are trying to understand mobility habits, movement patterns. So there's a lot of ways that a data set, one particular location data set could be used by different parties for different means. So that's something to keep in mind, and especially for this course, but just understanding data in general, is that the reuse of it is what can lead to a lot of issues beyond the initial data collection from the user. And additionally, you can also use this location data in conjunction with other types of data, as I mentioned, for example, online activity. So you can look at someone's location data, but then try to connect that with other data sets to try to identify the person's personal characteristics, who they are. So it's not just necessarily the location data itself, but it's also what can be used in conjunction with to better ascertain a person's identity or their characteristics. So it's not just about the sale of the data, the location data, but also how it gets used by multiple different types of buyers, and also in conjunction with what other types of data. So that's a really important thing to keep in mind, and something I really like that they went over in the article, and especially when it comes to how data can be used. And then moving on to the last point, the existing privacy regime in the U.S. is notice of consent. This is actually really important because that's our main legal regime, and so we have notice of consent. There really is no limits on who can actually purchase your data. There's no limits, nor is there really prevention of who can buy your data. So that's something to really keep in mind. At least why we have so many issues, that we don't really have no limitations on the amount a person can buy, or an organization. Also, there's no limitation based on the identity of the buyer. And with the notice and consent regime, you really expect more of an individualistic approach. Really, that individuals will will be active and try to opt out of data sharing arrangements with data brokers. But this is pretty unrealistic in practice. I know, for myself, for me, it's like, you're sharing data with multiple different entities, and especially when you use any digital service, especially online, you're pretty much kind of, you're required to share your data some way, somehow. So, it's pretty much, at least from an individual perspective, in trying to manage all these relationships, data sharing arrangements, because, as mentioned earlier, you might have, an app who you choose to opt in to share data with, an app that needs your location data, which is just for purely functional purposes. But then it could be that, one of the third-party sources that they use, for example, the software development kit, or another third-party service which they might use via an application programming interface API, might be collecting your location data and trying to monetize it. And so how do you manage the relationship between the user and the app, and then the user and the third parties which are connected to the app? For an individual, those are a lot of relationships to manage, and that's extremely difficult from an individual's perspective. From an end user's perspective, to actually manage all of those relationships. Alright, so moving on to the next slide. This covers the reading who's using your face, likely truth about facial recognition. This one's an interesting one. So you have the story of Jillian in New York, and her finding out that one of her images of her face, which she uploaded to online sites, had been used, as part of a face image data set to train a AI system. And that's pretty much what this article is really about. It's just talking about the fact that websites do get scraped, and really what happens with all this user-generated content that gets uploaded. So as you can see with the first point, all these user-generated content, which is UGC, a lot of it's under a Creative Commons license or a CC license. And so once you put under CC license, that of course determines how the content can be used. And it's just really interesting just to see how unfortunately the face image data was used here. And so you go to the second point. Really the major real issue is really the multiple uses, once again, of how data can be used. And so this is one of the things which, as you read the article, you could see that Jillian York was very upset about this. It was really the fact that this, one, that your face image ended up in this face image data set, which is used by multiple organizations, businesses, governments, to develop their own facial recognition systems. But the really unfortunate, troubling one was this used by a Chinese company to identify and track the Uyghur minority. And so this article just showing some of the unfortunate unintended consequences. And so you see benefit point there. CC licenses are not a good tool for protecting privacy. They're not designed specifically for that. They're designed to be a permissive license for copyright, so that people could use and reuse copyrighted materials for commercial and non-commercial purposes. And which is what it's for, and that's what's really great, because CC licenses are actually really good. I don't mean to try to say that CC licenses are necessarily poor. They're actual, for what their purpose is, it's a very good tool. the issue is that they're not necessarily a good tool for protecting privacy, and that's the other issue is people using UGC, which is under a CC license, which could go and harm someone else, in the future, as part of a trained assets for a AI ML system. And the other thing too is just, at least from the user's perspective, is really you probably don't expect to lose control over how your UGC is going to be used. That's also really important to keep in mind. Is that once you upload it, it's on their license, and now other people can use it. And even more worrying is that once especially with Jillian, her having her face image as part of a face image data set, once it gets added to that data set, how do you remove it from that data set? And it's pretty unlikely that you'd be able to do that. So lots of unfortunate concerns there. And then going back to the multiple use and reuses, which I went over a little bit on the first slide. Regarding location data, it's the same thing for face image data sets. You can use for academic, could be commercial, but it really does lead to a big issue with the notice and consent regime. But if you only have a one-time consent procedure, it's really tough thing to do. But it's hard to anticipate the future uses. The multiple use and reuses of data. So just having a one-time consent procedure is actually very difficult to manage all of these future uses that come about with data, especially when it comes to face image assets. And so just quick reminder, if you don't know what facial recognition technology is, this is got mentioned in the article, but it's just technology to help recognize faces. Primarily gets used for security and surveillance. Governments do use this a lot to help track people. And going back to the second point, regarding the use by a Chinese company, this use could also be used to harm other people who you might never thought that your image could be used, I guess. And that's one thing that Jillian York really points out in the article. It's her concern is really less that it's being used; it's more that how it's being used, and that's really one of the really big core issues with data is really how it's used, not necessarily that it is used, and then the negative uses that can arise from that, and this once again goes back to the fact that can be reused multiple ways and for multiple purposes. Could be could just be purely for research. It could be economic. Could be some other reason. But things you don't really know why it's being used, and this can lead to unintended consequences. It's pretty doubtful that anyone would think that once you upload your face image to a website or social network, that it could be used for to support a facial recognition technology. And once again, like where do they get most of this data from? They just scraped it from the web. It's usually described as web scraping, very common term. And of course, once you have the assets, it can be shared with multiple people, and that's really the main point I really want to take away from from this articles that that can be used and reused in multiple different ways. Could be for positive use, could be for negative uses, but especially for users who upload content onto online. Could be a social network, could be a social media website, could be any really any site where you're allowed to create user-generated content. That could be used for unintended purposes beyond what you initially thought you were setting up for. Because usually when people upload their image, it's usually for a specific purpose which they've thought of. It could be just to share with their friends and whatnot. but then it could be reused for, once again, facial recognition technology to help train that. So, just the unintended uses, and the fact that, just the tools that we currently have aren't necessarily very good at helping protect privacy, and especially with multiple uses, having a one-time consent procedure, decide how to use your content is probably not very effective. And once it ends up in the hands of all these multiple parties, it's really tough to get your face image, data back or get removed from the data set. That's extremely difficult. And that's just really what this article goes over. So I think it's a pretty good example of just the unintended consequences of uploading user-generated content, and the fact that that can be used for positive or negative purposes, can be used for academic or research purposes, economic purposes, but really showing the flexibility of data, but also from the user and the user perspective from a human's perspective, also just the fact that it could be used to harm people, but at the same time it could be used to necessarily benefit people, even though facial recognition technology sometimes, well, I say good amount of time generally seems to be more harmful than beneficial. But it's really the fact that these can be harmful, but can also be beneficial. It's not necessarily one or the other. It just, a lot of it really depends on the use and what the use by the party developing the AI system, and what they're trying to seek from it. All right, moving on to the next slide. All right, we have data relations. This one's a really good short one. This one gets talked about a lot more, I think, in lecture 3. So datafication, what is it? It's turning on and or offline activity into data. This is, datafication is the process of turning everything into data and then trying to, hopefully somewhat try to monetize it. And then Salome goes over some of the reasons why datafication should be considered wrong. So we have 3 reasons: surveillance, feudalism, and relational. So with surveillance, this is violating technology users' autonomy by undermining our ability to learn about ourselves and express ourselves to others. And so I think there's much more of a traditional view, especially when it comes to privacy. Especially, I'd say in the U.S., is much more like a prevailing view, because we don't want government surveillance. The thing is, not just government surveillance, we don't want, corporate surveillance. Generally, people just don't want to be surveilled and have their autonomy be restricted. So I think that's one that's probably resonates very much in the U.S., and I say that's generally much more of a traditional view we have on privacy. Secondly, feudalism. Feudalism. In this reason, datafication is wrong because it traps technology users in unfair economic arrangements, which is similar to feudalism. So at least in this one, we're really just thinking about the fact that you had to pretty much exchange your personal data to access digital services online. And once again, going back to the one-time consent procedure, of course, your data can be used and reused multiple times for multiple different purposes. So you don't really know what's going to happen to it. And I think it's, to get the use of digital service, you gotta get your data. But most importantly, you gotta look at the bargaining power between the entity offering the digital service and the user, and usually the entity offering the digital services to much bigger companies. They have much bigger bargaining power, and it's really tough for an individual technology user to bargain with them about their economic arrangements and how their data should be used. So that's where the similarity to feudalism comes in, and that's do talk about that a little bit more, and I think in lecture 5. Now we move to relational. Because datafication is wrong, because datafication is a social process. This evaluated data is in the aggregate from final relationships between different data points. So in this view, it's wrong because it subjects people to unexpected and somewhat harmful social harms, social informational harms. And so it's wrong because it impedes our ability to create relationships, but also the fact that we do have relationships and similarities with others can lead to harm for us. So deprecation is wrong here because based on our relations with others, we could face economic or personal harms. And then lastly, the relational view provides a more robust conceptualization of the ills of deprecation, surveillance, and feudalism. That was Salome's core argument. So deprecation is wrong, but the relational view is a little bit, as well as more robust conceptualization. This allows us to see what really makes deprecation wrong, given that the value of that only really arises in the aggregate, while the feudalist and the surveillance approach conceptualizations really look more at the individualist, while relation looks more of it as a social process. Alright, next slide. Surveillance advertising. So surveillance advertising, this branch is tracking technology users across the web to send personalized advertisements based on location, demographic, or other personally identifying characteristic. It's pretty similar to datification. The main difference here is that this is specifically to send personalized ads. So you'll see this like on Facebook or on their social networks. So that they're not just tracking on Facebook, they're tracking on other sites. Even when you're not online, they're trying to track you. So this way they get more personal information, and therefore it should be easier to, well, at least for in case of Facebook, sell that data to advertisers so that they can take that data and then send you more personalized advertisement, which would be more much closer to your preferences. And of course, as it says there in the second point, they track your pretty much everywhere on the web and also some of your offline activity. And of course, really the issue really comes from the fact that really there's a lack of knowledge about how you're being tracked, and that if people really knew how they're being tracked, they probably would not agree to that. And that goes to the third point, the empowered consumer fallacy. As Lise mentioned in the article, the advertisers are really pushing this fallacy of the empowered consumer, that the consumer has a lot more power and control over the ads that they see, and that if consumers don't want to see these ads, they would make it pretty clear and apparent. But we know that it's actually not true in reality. And then going to the point about trying to make informed choice about that collection and sharing with third parties is pretty much impossible, because it's really hard to understand how data gets shared online and offline. And this is something that also came up with the article regarding the location data industry. It's just what happens with this data. It's really tough to know. It's really tough for an individual really to really have some control over how their data gets shared. And that's the next point, effective privacy regulation. So once again, going back to like the notice of consent procedure, current regulation doesn't really provide strong protections for an individual's privacy. And the last point, most consumers don't trust companies with their data, and this goes back to the point of the empowered consumer fallacy. Since most consumers don't actually trust companies with their data, you expect a little bit stronger protections, but the main argument from the advertising industry is that consumers are very empowered, so that they're well knowledgeable and know how to decide how their data should be shared, but in reality it isn't true. And if consumers really have much more control over how their data is shared and collected, and then how personal ads are sent to them, they probably would make different choices because they don't trust companies with their data. Alright, next slide. Alright. So this one, Emerson says I had digital data used. This one focused a little bit more on scientific research. So the first point is really just the monopolization of data by corporations can threaten society's ability to research and solve pressing problems. And one of the solutions mentioned by the authors was having a data trust for behavioral data. You go into data trusts in lecture 5. But really going to their core problem, and this kind of core issue in the data economy is really just, since corporations hold just so much data, for researchers, they want to better understand the problem, especially something that's happening online or involves social network. They have to go to the corporation to get the data, and of course the issue is that it's the data in the format which something that researcher can actually use. It might not be in that format. It's the corporation actually collecting the data that researchers actually need, or is it just their own platform data, which might not necessarily be very useful? If researchers want to access this data, are there any restrictions on that? Could the research lead to them not being able to get future access to the data? And so the authors suggested data trust for behavioral data, so that you just have the trust, have all the behavioral data, so make it a little, much easier for researchers to access the data without having to worry about possible retaliation from corporations, which leads to the third point, which is the political economy can have a chilling effect on research. And some things I mentioned a bit earlier, are shown in the indented bullets under the third point. Those are things to really worry about, and I didn't really mention what's corporate captures, having corporations control, what research can be done, what comes out. And this can be a limitation on society, because the problem is that corporations might want research done on might not necessarily be in the best interest of society. And then moving to the fourth point, there's a lot of questions about the data pipeline. Yes, sure, these corporations have all this data, but going back to really previous slide about surveillance advertising, and also on the location data industry, which was the first slide, was how do you get this data? And it's like, sure, they have all this data, but it could have been done really without the consent of the users, or at least if they did consent to it, it might have been once again one time, and they probably were not thinking that would be used this way. And then going to the surveillance advertising might be collected without the user's awareness, or it could have been with an app that they were using, and they didn't know that app was also sharing data with another app. Going back to the first slide of apps sharing things with APIs or SDKs. So that's something to really think about when it comes to fundamental questions like where does this data come from, and is it ethically collected? This might or might not be, and how's it also being used? That's something to really think about regarding how corporations collect data. And then moving on to the fifth point, the authors mentioned 3 steps that policymakers and scientific institutions should take to safeguard behavioral data as a public good. They mentioned 3, build public infrastructure, take control, and expand governance. So regarding building public infrastructure, really here it's just developing your own. What I recommend policymakers and institutions develop their own digital infrastructure to store, and it's really more like a data layer and a computational layer. Having those systems in place to be able to have the data and computational resources to do the research themselves and make it publicly available. And so people are already working on this. Just give them the resources so they can do it themselves, and also having participation mechanisms as well, so that the people who the data is collected about also have somewhat of a say in how it gets used, and the ability to remedy inaccurate or harmful uses. And so regarding take control, that's just setting policies to to really help gets data out of these corporations. So trying to get them to transfer them to from private entities to public institutions. So kind of some of a data collaborative. Trying to push that from a public's perspective, and do talk more about data collaboratives in lecture 5. And lastly, expand governance. And so that's just creating more public institutions specifically to steward data in the public interest. So they mentioned a couple of examples that we can somewhat build off, especially here in the U.S. You have the Library of Congress, National Science Foundation, National Institutes of Health. So they all pretty much somewhat have their own public data trusts. I mean, as a note, I know I keep mentioning public data trust, but the article is not really specific about what they mean by public data trusts. Really, for the most part, I think that's just a public institutional form for collecting and storing data. So at least when they say data trusts, they might not necessarily be specifically talking about a data trust, which is also a legal trust, but just the means to collect and store data, which might be a little bit closer to a data commons. I just wanted to mention that just in case you're watching this and you think they're talking about data trusts as an illegal trust. And then going back to some of the fundamental questions, one thing I forgot to mention was also worrying about bad data. So of course, let's go back to the garbage in, garbage out problem. And so, if we have bad data in, we get bad insights out. And so, as possible that that the data sets actually even help the corporations themselves are not necessarily of the highest quality, and if those get used in research, it might lead to negative outcomes or lead to unfortunately not very useful research to help solve some present problems by society. And so that's pretty much it for this. That's pretty much it for this slides for lecture 1. Hopefully you come and watch the video for lecture 2. If you have any questions, just put a question on the forum. You can send an email to ledgerback@gmail.com, or you can send a DM on Twitter to @ledgerback. Once again, this is Charles with Ledgerback Digital Commons Research Cooperative. Thank you for listening, and hopefully you come by for lecture 2.